The road through the Auster forest had no name on any map worth trusting. It was the kind of path that existed because people had walked it long enough. Not because anyone had planned it, packed dirt between old roots, the smell of wet leaves, the occasional sound of something moving in the canopy above. That probably wasn't a threat. Probably. Frieren was 2 hours out of the last village when the air changed. Not temperature, not wind. Something beneath those things, a shift in the texture of the world, as though the space between her next step and the ground had briefly decided not to cooperate. She felt it the way a sailor feels a current change direction under the hull. Not dramatic, not violent, just fundamentally wrong. She stopped walking. The staff in her right hand caught the light between the branches. Silver hair, sharp ears, a white robe with gold trim that had collected a moderate amount of travel dust. None of these things were unusual for her. The expression on her face was the same as it always was, calm, slightly distant, like someone doing a calculation that didn't require rushing. She looked at the trees. The trees looked wrong. They had looked wrong for the last half second. And now they were gone entirely, and instead of forest floor, she was standing on something flat and gray and hard, and the sky above her was the color of ash and full of structures she had never seen before. Towers. Not the kind built from stone by court architects or wealthy guilds. These were glass and metal, and they rose so high that the tops of them disappeared into haze. Between them, noise. A sustained, layered roar, mechanical, human, electrical, that pressed in from every direction at once. Frieren did not move. She stood on the edge of what appeared to be a crossing of wide gray roads. And the roads were full of metal objects moving very fast in coordinated streams, and people were everywhere, and the light came from sources she could not immediately identify, and every surface carried text in a language her mind reached for and found nothing. Her grip on the staff did not tighten. Her breathing did not change. She simply processed. No familiar ambient mana. No ley trace, no current running beneath the ground, no residue of anything she would recognize as magic in use or magic at rest. Nothing that 1,000 years of trained sensitivity could locate. Whatever this place was built on it was not the same substrate as home, which did not mean her own reserves were gone. It meant she was operating without a map. One of the metal objects, long, yellow, boxy, came very close and made a sound that was mostly aggression. The people around her moved in coordinated patterns she didn't understand yet. A light mounted on a pole cycled through colors. Green. The streams moved. Red. They stopped. This appeared to be a system. She filed that away and started walking following the current of foot traffic. Because standing still in a river of people generates attention. And attention was the last thing she needed while she had no information. The sounds sorted themselves gradually. A word repeated across multiple conversations. Another. She heard help 3 times in the first block and understood it. She heard Vought twice and filed it as a noun, a name probably given the way the people said it with a particular neutrality that meant either familiarity or careful avoidance. She heard hero spoken with a specific kind of flatness, the way people say a word they've stopped believing. On the side of a building, a face enormous painted or projected onto glass. A man in a blue and white suit with a jaw like a geological feature and a smile that had been engineered rather than felt. Text beneath it that she couldn't read yet, but the image needed no translation. She had seen that posture before on every piece of propaganda produced by every kingdom that needed its population to feel safe while being controlled. Same shape. New paint. She kept walking. A food stall. A man at a window selling objects wrapped in paper. The smell was animal fat and salt, not appealing in any refined sense, but immediately identifiable as caloric. She watched two people conduct a transaction, paper exchanged, object exchanged. Simple. She had nothing to exchange. She moved on. 4 blocks in, she had acquired the word for stop, the word for move, the word for danger, and a rough map of the block she was on assembled from visual repetition and the logic of foot traffic. Language was a system. Systems had patterns. She had learned 3 dead languages from the fragments of ruins and another 2 from tribes in the Eastern Territories, whose tongues hadn't been heard in centuries. Whatever this was, it was not beyond reach. What was beyond immediate reach, Fern and Stark. She had been 2 hours ahead of them on the road when the shift happened, which meant either they had followed through it or they hadn't. The former was preferable. The former was not confirmed. She turned into a narrower street, less noise, longer shadows, a smell of water and old stone underneath the mechanical layer. A place to stand still and think without being in anyone's way. She had been still for approximately 40 seconds when the sound started 3 blocks east. Not mechanical, not the layered city roar. This was impact structural, repeated the particular acoustic signature of something very heavy being used as a blunt instrument in a way architecture had not anticipated. Then a secondary sound, human, several voices high and sharp. She went east. The scene resolved as she rounded the corner. A man, no, not quite a man. Something with a man's shape and a man's face, but a bearing that sat wrong, the way a creature raised in captivity sits wrong, too confident in spaces that should feel dangerous, was standing in the middle of the road. He had put his hands through the front of a vehicle and was holding it off the ground. The people inside were screaming. 3 more people on the sidewalk had been thrown or had run. One was not getting up. The man doing this was wearing civilian clothes, no insignia, and he was smiling the way people smile when no one has ever made them stop. Frierin assessed no visible weapon impact damage, consistent with extreme physical strength. No energy signature she could detect, no apparent tactical objective. This was not combat. This was performance. She walked to the person on the ground. A woman conscious, bleeding from a cut above her ear, one arm held at an angle that was going to hurt considerably more once shock wore off. Frieren crouched. She placed one hand on the ground between herself and the standing man and cast the defensive barrier, the lining of interlocked mana that took the shape of interlocking hexagons when fully deployed, invisible unless actively struck. The woman looked up at her. What? Stay down. 2 words from the vocabulary she'd assembled. Close enough. The man with the vehicle noticed her. He dropped it. The vehicle landed badly, a sound like a metal animal falling, and turned. He was looking at her the way people look at something that doesn't fit the scene they've constructed. Who the hell are you? She didn't have enough language yet to answer that. She also didn't particularly need to. 2 men in identical black clothing arrived from the north end of the block, moving fast, carrying equipment she didn't recognize. They reached the woman on the ground before Frieren registered they were heading there, specifically, and one of them took the woman's uninjured arm. Not to help her up, to move her away from the scene. Frieren put her hand on the man's wrist. Not hard, just contact and a look. The man stopped. He looked at her hand, then at her face, then at the staff. People in this world did not carry staffs. The visual register did not compute. Ma'am, you need to step back. This is a no. 1 word. She had that one. A pause. The man in black looked at his partner. Some kind of signal passed between them. They released the woman on the ground and stepped back, and their movements were the careful movements of people deciding not to escalate in a public space. The original man, the one who had been holding the vehicle, was gone. She had not seen him leave. Fast, then. An ambulance arrived within moments. The woman was taken. The men in black had already melted back into the crowd with the particular efficiency of people paid to disappear. But not before one of them had moved quickly through the small cluster of onlookers, touching shoulders. Speaking low, and 2 phones changed hands in the process and did not come back. Standard pattern, probably. Fast enough to suggest practice. Frieren noticed the small gold and white patch on the shoulder of the nearer man's jacket before he turned away. A logo. A name she had already filed Vought. Frieren stood in the cleared street and looked at the scorch mark where the barrier had briefly glowed when one of the retreating men had accidentally walked into its edge. A faint hexagonal pattern on the pavement, already fading. She looked up. On the building across the street, a small lens mounted high-pointed at the intersection. It had been pointed at the intersection before she arrived. Somewhere in this city, someone had just watched everything she did. She picked up her staff and walked away before the second set of responders arrived. 3 floors above the intersection, in a vehicle with tinted windows that had been parked at the corner for the past 40 minutes. A man watched the footage replay on a tablet. The woman in the white robe. The barrier. The hexagonal light. The way she had stopped his extraction team with 1 word and 1 look and no apparent effort. He forwarded the clip upward with a single line of text. Unknown subject. Powers unclassified. Recommend immediate monitoring. Do not surface. The response came back in 4 minutes, confirmed. Clean the block. Keep it quiet. By the time the police arrived to take statements from witnesses, 3 of those witnesses could not clearly remember what they had seen. 1 remembered a woman in unusual clothing. 1 remembered a bright light. The 3rd said there had been some kind of fight, and then it was over, and honestly, he hadn't had his glasses. The 2 whose phones had been quietly collected during the cleanup remembered even less, mostly because they spent the next 10 minutes wondering where their phones had gone. The camera footage from that intersection would show a minor traffic incident. Nothing else. Vaught's media relations team never had to make a call. The park was quieter than the streets, but not quiet. Birds whined a child somewhere beyond the tree line, the persistent mechanical undertone that this city apparently ran on at all hours. Frieren sat on a bench near a stone fountain that had been turned off for the season and watched people. This was, in fact, the most efficient thing she could be doing. She had no currency, no contacts, no map she could read, and approximately 40 words of functional vocabulary. Rushing would not improve any of those numbers. So she watched. A man in a gray coat passed the bench for the 3rd time in 20 minutes. He was not looking at her. That was the very deliberate way he was not looking at her, the particular angle of his head that suggested a studied lack of interest. She had spent enough time in places where people wanted to follow someone without being seen to recognize the shape of the effort. She did not react. She kept her attention on the fountain and noted the gray coat in the part of her mind she kept for threat inventory. On the far edge of the park, a dark vehicle had been stationary for the same 20 minutes. Different model from the one that had drifted alongside her for 4 blocks after she left the intersection. But the stillness had the same quality a machine at rest that was actually very much at work. The camera on the lamppost at the park's east entrance had shifted its angle twice since she arrived. The first shift she thought was automated. The second confirmed it wasn't. 3 layers. She counted them the way she counted spell structures, methodically without alarm. She stood, collected the staff, and headed west through the park's interior path, away from the lamppost and the gray coat and the vehicle. Not fast. Fast drew notice. She moved at the pace of someone with somewhere to be, who was not particularly anxious about getting there. Behind her at a distance, she did not bother measuring exactly. She heard footsteps adjust. Not yet. The city's transit system announced itself via signs she still couldn't read in full. But the logic of it was legible, color-coded lines. Arrows, the universal grammar of a system designed to move large numbers of people efficiently. She followed a cluster of commuters down a staircase into an underground station and bought nothing because she had nothing to buy with. And instead stood near a map panel and memorized the color distribution and the shape of the route lines until she had a rough internal model of the city's geography. The gray coat had not followed her down. The vehicle obviously couldn't. That left the cameras, which were everywhere, and whoever was watching them, which she could not currently address. She took the train heading north for 4 stops, got off. Waited on the platform for the next southbound, took that for 2 stops, and surfaced on a street that smelled of cooking oil and had fewer corporate facades than the blocks near the intersection. Narrower. More foot traffic that was actually going somewhere rather than performing the act of going somewhere. A shop with a large window and screens on the wall inside, moving images, voices the visual grammar of broadcast. She stood at the glass and watched. The screens showed a man in a red and blue suit landing on the roof of a building while a crowd below cheered. Cut to a woman with light emanating from her palms, helping clear rubble from a collapsed structure. Cut to an anchor at a desk, speaking into a camera with the controlled urgency of someone reading carefully scripted alarm. Frieren read the images, not the words. The suits were costumes. The crowd response was practiced. The anchor's expression was a product. She had seen courts that operated on the same principle, the appearance of power carefully managed so that the substance of it could move without scrutiny. She heard Vought twice from the broadcast. Once in connection with the man in the suit. Once in connection with a number spoken quickly that she didn't have the language to parse yet. A girl inside the shop, maybe 12, was staring at her through the glass. Frierin looked at the girl. The girl pointed at the staff. Frieren looked at the staff, then back at the girl. She had no explanation available in the correct language, so she said nothing. And after a moment, the girl went back to whatever she had been doing. Frieren filed the staff was conspicuous. She needed to address that soon, or at least carry it differently. 12 blocks northwest of the park, in the back seat of a company vehicle with the interior light off, a man named Mason was relaying his afternoon to a supervisor via encrypted line. She slipped the close tail at the park. Didn't run, didn't confront. Moved through the transit system for about 20 minutes, and we lost her in the camera gaps. Visual. We have street camera to the station entrance. After that, gaps. A pause on the line. The extraction team from this morning says the barrier she deployed was non-standard. Not in any powered profile we have on file. Correct? And the staff. Yes. Another pause. Hold the perimeter wide. Don't compress yet. We need to know if she's alone. Mason looked at the tablet in his lap, where a second report had arrived 40 minutes ago from a district 11 blocks east. 2 individuals. One male, late teens, red hair, had engaged with Vought security after a minor physical altercation. One female, similar age range, dark hair, had discharged what the reporting officer described as, and Osborne had read this 3 times, rapid fire pulses of visible energy from her hands. Not the same person as the woman in the white robe, not obviously connected. But the same impossible category of event in the same city within the same 12-hour window. He forwarded the Eastern report upward with a single added line. 2 separate incidents, different subjects, same classification gap. Recommend treating as related until confirmed otherwise. The response came back before Mason had finished capping his pen. Agreed. Split the teams. East situation is priority 2. Do not lose the primary. Frieren found the library by following a woman carrying 3 books and a canvas bag. reasoning that someone transporting that volume of reading material was probably going somewhere reading material was available in quantity. She was correct. The building was large, climate-controlled, and nearly silent. She stood in the entrance for a moment and let the quiet settle around her, like a change in air pressure, something her nervous system had been waiting for since she arrived. She found a section with dictionaries. She could not read the labels, but she recognized the format. Dense columns, alphabetical structure, the distinctive visual density of a reference text. She took one from the shelf and sat at a table near the back wall, away from the windows, and began working through it the way she worked through any new system. From first principles, looking for the underlying structure rather than memorizing surface forms. It was slow. It was also exactly the right use of the next few hours. A librarian came by once and looked at the staff leaning against the table with the expression of someone reviewing a policy document in their head. Frieren looked up. The librarian apparently decided this was not worth the conversation and moved on. She worked until the light through the high windows changed color and the crowd inside thinned. By then, she had a functional grasp of the alphabet, approximately 200 words she could decode if written slowly, and a clearer sense of the gap between what she could read and what she could hear spoken at normal speed. Large gap, manageable with time. She also had the word Vought confirmed as a proper noun, a company name first encountered in a newspaper headline left on the table beside her. Then again, in a corporate profile on one of the library's public computers. Someone had left a browser tab open. The page described Vought in the language of Investor Relations, Entertainment Division, Defense Contracts, Humanitarian Initiatives. Entertainment and defense in the same sentence, written by people who saw no contradiction there. A company that ran heroes like a product line. She had seen the equivalent before in courts that license mages as court assets and manage their public image through official portraits and authorized biographies. The difference was scale. And the television. Outside through the library's glass doors, she could see the street was dark now. Artificial light everywhere. The city didn't go dim the way forests didn't have the gradual negotiation between day and dark. It simply stayed lit at a different register. She needed food. She needed somewhere to sleep that was not a public building. She had neither currency nor a viable plan for acquiring them yet, which was inconvenient but not novel. She had spent decades in worse material situations and navigated them by patience and opportunism rather than speed. She was sitting with this calculation when the man appeared. He did not come from outside. He had been in the library, she realized, for at least the last hour. She had registered him as a large, dark-coated figure at a table near the periodicals, and then deprioritized him because he had been still and reading. Now, he was not reading. He was standing at the end of her row, hands in his coat pockets, looking at her the way people look at something they've already made a decision about. Dark coat, heavy build. A face that had absorbed considerable damage over the years and was not particularly trying to hide the fact. He looked at the staff against the table. He looked at her. He looked at the door to the street. White robe. His voice was flat, declarative, an accent she didn't have a map for yet. Staff. Morning incident on Carlisle and 9th. That you... She held his gaze. Yes. He pulled out a chair across the table and sat down without being invited. You speak English? Some. She held up 2 fingers close together. Right. He leaned back. You know what Vought is? She considered. Company. Heroes. Something moved in his expression, not surprise, exactly more like confirmation of a theory. They're watching you. Have been since this morning. You notice? Yes. And you came to a library. He looked around the quiet room with an expression that was either disbelief or something very close to respect. All right. I'm going to give you a choice, and I want you to actually listen before you do anything with that stick." She did not reach for the staff. She waited. "My name is Butcher." He watched her face. "I know some things about Vought that they'd rather I didn't. I also know they've already moved on your friends. 2 of them came through the same way you did, picked up east of here a few hours ago." A pause. "Yeah, there it is. So here's the choice. You walk out of here alone. They take you in a day or 2 and you never find your people. Or you come with me and we talk about how that changes." Frieren was quiet for a moment. The library hummed around them, climate-controlled distant footsteps, the faint creak of the building doing what old buildings do at night. Where? Somewhere they're not watching. He stood. "Hide the ears, now." She looked at him steadily. "Right," he said again. "Follow close." "Doctor." In an operations room on the 14th floor of a building that did not appear on public maps, a monitor displayed the library's exterior camera feed. The primary subject had been stationary inside for 4 hours and 20 minutes. The tail had held wide per orders and not closed. At 9:47 p.m., the subject exited the library's side entrance alongside an unidentified male in a dark coat. The camera caught 2 seconds of profile before they turned into a service alley that had no coverage. The analyst watching the feed flagged it immediately and sent it up the chain with a timestamp and a note, "Primary has acquired a contact. Unidentified. Review underway." The response came back 11 minutes later, and it was longer than usual. The last line read, "Do not lose either of them. If the contact is who we think it is, this gets complicated fast." On a separate screen in the same room, a second file was open. 2 individuals, East District, currently in holding at a psychiatric wellness center that officially offered therapeutic services and did not in fact offer anything of the kind. The intake form listed them as Jane Doe and John Doe, no prior medical history admitted under a voluntary wellness protocol that had never once been voluntary. The analyst looked at both screens for a moment. Then he pulled up the internal memo that had come down 3 hours ago and reread the relevant line. "Treat all 3 incidents as connected. Handle quietly. Do not surface." He saved the file and went back to watching the empty alley on his monitor, waiting for something to reappear that had no intention of doing so. The safe house was a second-floor apartment above a dry cleaning business that had probably not cleaned anything dry in several years. The smell said mildew and old takeout containers. The layout said 4 people had been living here for weeks without agreeing on how to handle dishes. Frierin stood near the door and assessed. 3 other people in the room. A young man with a pale, watchful quality, the kind of person who had learned to read a situation before committing to any expression. A larger man, older, who held himself with the specific stillness of someone trained to stay calm, but was not at this particular moment calm. And a third seated at a folding table with a laptop who had stopped typing when they came in and had not started again. Butcher dropped his coat on a chair. "Right. Everyone breathe. That's her." The pale one's attention went straight to the staff. "That's her. She's..." He stopped, restarted. "She looks like she's cosplaying a D&D character." Frieren looked at him. He had the grace to stop talking. "She speaks some English." He moved to the folding table and nudged the laptop operator aside, pulled up a file, and turned the screen to face her. "Keep it simple. Come here." She crossed the room and looked at the screen. 2 images. Surveillance photos, low resolution, the grain of footage captured and compressed quickly. In the first, a narrow street, a blur of red at the top of frame the right color for Stark's hair. In the second, a loading bay, a figure in dark clothing being guided toward an unmarked vehicle head down. The figure's posture was Fern's. the specific way she held her shoulders when she was doing the calculation of whether to fight and had decided not to yet. Frieren studied both images for a long moment. Then she straightened. When? One word flat. This afternoon, Eastern District. Vought's containment team picked them up within 2 hours of whatever brought you all here. Butcher pulled the laptop back and closed it halfway. They're alive. That much I know. Where they're being held that I can get. But it's going to take access I don't currently have. Where? That's what I just said. I don't have it yet. Real images, partial location, no full address. The structure of a hook, not a gift, and she had read it the moment he turned the screen. What do you want? The room had gone very quiet. The pale one had moved slightly the way people move when they're preparing to intervene in something. The older man near the wall had crossed his arms. Butcher leaned against the table. Vought has been running a program for years. Illegal testing. Cover-ups. People dead who shouldn't be, and every witness either bought or scared into nothing. I want inside a specific facility. What's in there ends careers, maybe ends Vought entirely if it goes public. He paused. I can't get in without something that can handle what's guarding it. That's you. And my people. We find them at the same facility or in the same network, yes. She considered this. He was using Fern and Stark as leverage while also making the leverage sound like a bonus rather than a ransom. She noted this. No kill. Then slower. Not unless threat? Fine. I find them. I go home. After the facility. After. Something shifted at the edges of his expression. Not agreement exactly, more the particular quality of a man filing a condition away in a category labeled manageable. Deal. She did not offer a hand. He didn't either. This is insane. The pale one she had gathered his name was Huey, from the way the older man said it when telling him to lower his voice had moved to the kitchen area and was conducting a conversation with Butcher that he clearly thought was out of her range. It was not. We don't know what she is. We don't know where she came from. We don't know if Vought already has eyes on her. They do, Butcher said. Then why did you bring her here? Because she's more useful inside the tent than outside it. She could be a plant. She's not a plant, Huey. Plants don't show up in a city they've never seen before with no money, no phone, and a magic stick and spend the afternoon reading about Vought on a public computer. A pause. You had her watched? Since the park. Yeah. Frieren was examining the room's single window and the street below. The car that had been drifting the block when they arrived had made 2 passes now. Different vehicle from Vought's earlier rotation, but the interval was identical. Butcher. She didn't raise her voice. He came over, stood beside her, and looked down without touching the curtain. A beat. Clock's running then. How long? She kept her eyes on the street. Before they moved to grab, could be tonight, could be tomorrow morning. They like to do it clean, which means they want a location with fewer witnesses. He stepped back from the window. Which means we move first. The older man. Milk was how she'd parsed the name, which seemed improbable, but she'd heard it twice now, unfolded his arms. Billy, if we pull her into a Vought facility before we know the full layout, we're not running an operation, we're running an incident. Yeah, well. Butcher went back to the table. Incidents get results. Mange. Incidents also get people killed. Not people I care about. Milk's jaw tightened. He regarded Frieren the way you look at a weather system you've been told to work with. I want to be clear. Directly to her, slowly. Whatever he told you this was, it's more complicated than that. There are real civilians at risk if this goes wrong. Frieren held his gaze. He was being honest. That distinguished him from Butcher in a way she filed immediately. I understand. He nodded. It seemed to cost him something to accept that as sufficient, but he accepted it. On the 14th floor, Mason was reviewing the updated tracking report when the duty supervisor appeared at his shoulder. Mason pulled up the file on screen. We have a position on the primary. Second floor above Hanson Dry Cleaning on Mercer. She went in with 4 other individuals. 4. The supervisor set a coffee down. We have IDs. 1 confirmed. The coat that billed the vehicle he arrived in. Mason pulled up a secondary file and let the supervisor read the name at the top. A pause followed that had its own particular weight. He's involved. It was not a question. Appears so. Another pause. This does not leave this room until we've briefed Hartley. Hartley ran the division that ran Mason's division, and her name in a sentence meant the situation had been reclassified. And pull the East facility on alert. If he's running something, the 2 assets there become a pressure point. Mason added 2 lines to the log and saved it. Do we move on the apartment? Not yet. If we pull them all in now, we get bodies and questions. We wait until we know the full scope. The supervisor picked up the coffee. Find me a clean window, somewhere without foot traffic. After she left, Mason sat for a moment with the cursor blinking on the updated file. 5 unknowns, potentially 6, if the East assets were connected. 1 confirmed name with a very long history of costing Vought money and attention. And the woman in the white robe still unclassified, still without a profile entry that made any sense. He opened a new field in her record and typed threat assessment pending. Recommend extreme caution. Priority capture alive. Then he saved and went back to watching the Mercer Street camera feed. On top, Butcher spread a rough floor plan across the table. It had been drawn by hand, which told her several things about how he operated. Butcher tapped the drawing. Vought has 3 facilities that could hold them. 2 are administrative, too much traffic, too many cameras, someone would have talked by now. The 3rd is a converted psychiatric center in the northeast quarter, off the public map. Intake is voluntary on paper. He tapped a section of the drawing. Getting past the external security I can manage. Getting past whatever they have inside, that's where you come in. Frierin looked at the floor plan, then at Butcher. You have been inside. Once, years ago. His voice didn't change. Didn't go well. She didn't ask what that meant. She looked back at the drawing and traced the internal layout with 1 finger not touching the paper, just the shape of it getting the geometry into her memory. 2 entrances, a central corridor, a lower level marked with a question mark in pencil, which meant he didn't know what was down there, which meant neither did she. I need tools, she said. She paused, reaching for the right shape in a language that still had gaps. Tools that find strange, not normal things. She touched the edge of the map. Vought watches strange things. They have tools for it. Butcher was quiet for a moment. Huey and Milk both looked at her with slightly different expressions. Huey's closer to reluctant interest, Milk's closer to recalculating. You're saying Vought's detection gear, Butcher leaned back slowly, is the same gear you need to find your way back. Yes. He sat back. Something moved behind his face that she read as this just got more useful. Not for her reasons, for his. He now had a second objective to offer her. That was also a second hook to keep her moving in his direction. She had already seen this. She let him think she hadn't. Right, he scanned the others. Then we want the same facility, Same run. We go in 2 nights from now. Milk crossed his arms. This is moving fast. Vought moves faster. Butcher was already looking at the window. Frieren picked up the staff from where she'd leaned it against the wall and moved back to the window. The car on Mercer Street had stopped moving. It was parked now, engine off, positioned with a clean sight line to the building's entrance. They had found the apartment. They were waiting for a clean window. She turned from the glass. The net was tightening. She could read the geometry of it, the same way she read a spell closing in one less exit than another, until the only move left was the one someone else had planned. 1 night, she said. Not 2? Butcher clocked the street, and whatever he read there, he read it fast. 1 night? Fine. Outside, the car on Mercer stayed where it was. Patient, still watching the door in the practiced way of an organization that had learned the value of not rushing and the cost of being wrong. Somewhere in the northeast quarter, a building with no public address and carefully maintained landscaping ran its intake logs through an overnight review cycle. 2 new entries, flagged as priority assets, held pending assessment. The log did not include names because neither entry had provided one. The billboard was 3 stories tall and impossible to ignore, which was probably the point. A man in a red and blue suit, jaw raised, one fist at his side, and the other opened, the universal posture of someone who wanted you to feel protected without specifying from what. Beneath the image, in letters large enough to read from a moving vehicle, the 7. America's Finest, a Vought international production. Fern stood at the base of it and read every word twice. That's a hero. Basson. Stark from beside her. Not a question, he had the tone of someone assembling a picture from parts that didn't entirely fit. It's an advertisement. He took in the suit, the fist, the production credit at the bottom. Same thing. Here, possibly. She turned away from the billboard. Stop looking up. You look like a tourist. I am a tourist. You look like one. That's the problem. They had been in this city for 6 hours. The first 2 had been the worst. The drop, the noise, the immediate understanding that nothing here operated on any system either of them had been trained to read. Fern had spent those 2 hours doing what she always did under pressure, which was observe and say very little. Stark had spent them wanting to hit something, which was what he always did, and had been persuaded not to by a combination of Fern's expression and the sheer number of cameras visible from any given corner. No Frieren. No trace, no mana signature, nothing to follow. Wherever she had come through, it wasn't here. She's alive. He said it the way people say things they need to be true. Yes. Fern kept walking. She landed somewhere else in this city. We find her, or she finds us. Until then, we don't draw attention. By doing what? By doing nothing that requires explaining. A food vendor on the corner was selling something wrapped in foil that smelled like it had been cooked an hour ago and had not improved since. Stark's stomach made a sound that was nearly diplomatic in its restraint. We also need to eat. His stomach had already made the argument. I'm aware. And sleep. Also aware. And I don't have any of the... He rubbed 2 fingers together, the universal gesture. Neither do I. She stopped at a corner and read the intersection, the flow of foot traffic, the positioning of cameras on the nearest 3 poles. We find somewhere quiet. We don't use magic. We don't start fights. We wait. Stark was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm not good at waiting. I know. She started walking again. Try. The incident happened on a block they hadn't intended to cross. A man stumbling out of a doorway, drunk or injured, it was hard to tell, went down hard on the pavement directly in front of them. Behind him, two others who had clearly done the pushing. One of them said something fast and sharp in the local language. The other laughed. Stark's hand went to his side before he'd consciously decided to move it. The axe wasn't there. Whatever had pulled them through had stripped their gear in transit, left them with only their clothes and the weight of empty hands. But the muscle memory was, and his body had already turned to face the two men. Fern put one hand on his arm. Firm, flat, no room for discussion. The two men registered Stark's size and posture, registered Fern's expression, and made the calculation that this particular situation was not worth whatever came next. They left. The man on the pavement got up, slowly said something that may have been thanks, and went in the other direction. Stark stood still for a moment, the tension bleeding out of his shoulders 1 degree at a time. I wasn't going to. I know. But they didn't. He exhaled. I'm not good at this. I'm aware. You've mentioned it. She started moving again, pulling him with her by implication rather than contact. There are cameras on every corner. If we start something, someone records it, and then someone else sees it, and then we become a problem that needs to be handled. You sound like you've thought about this a lot. I've been thinking about nothing else since we got here. They turned into a narrower street, less foot traffic, fewer lenses pointed in their direction. Fern's shoulders dropped a precise fraction, no more than necessary. 3 blocks later, they were in the shadow of an overpass when the van appeared. It came from the east end of the block, unhurried and parked across the mouth of the street with a quiet competence that had nothing accidental about it. Dark paneling, no markings. Windows tinted past the point of legality. A second vehicle arrived from the west end 30 seconds later. Fern counted 4 doors opening. 8 people, dark clothing, earpieces, moving without urgency because urgency implied something was out of control. Don't, she said quietly to Stark. I wasn't. You were. She kept her voice level. They want us alive. Flat certain. Look at what they're carrying. He looked. No firearms drawn. Restraints at the belt. 2 of the 8 had medical cases. One was already lifting a small device that she recognized from the shape of its purpose rather than any specific knowledge as something designed to measure or record. They're not here to kill us. Flat certain. Which means we have time. Time to do what? She didn't answer because the answer was not yet. And that was only useful if he trusted her, and he did. But she needed him to keep trusting her for the next 60 seconds while she worked out what the answer actually was. The lead figure raised one hand and said something short into a radio. Then to them in slow and careful English, "We're here to help. Please come with us." Stark made a sound that was technically not a word. Fern stepped forward. It was the right move and the wrong move simultaneously. The right move because it communicated compliance, which kept the situation from escalating into the kind of scene that ended with someone sedated on pavement. The wrong move because she understood this even as she did it. Once she stepped forward, the geometry of the situation shifted, and stepping back became much harder. She was aware of this. She stepped forward anyway, because the alternative was Stark making a decision with his hands instead of his head. And she had not spent 18 months managing that particular tendency only to lose him to it now. Fine. To the lead figure, then back over her shoulder. "Stark, come." He came. His jaw was set in the specific way that meant he was doing the thing he decided to do while simultaneously cataloging every possible way to undo it later, which was the most she could ask of him right now. The lead figure did not smile. That Fern noted was actually a point in their favor. Smiling would have been worse. One of the escort team standing slightly behind fixed on Fern's ears a beat longer than the situation required, not hostile, just cataloging. She filed that too. The facility was white. Not white the way old buildings go pale with age, but white the way things are white when someone has made a deliberate and sustained effort to make them so. Floors, walls, the ceiling, the uniforms of the people who met them at the entrance. The reception area had plants and soft lighting, and a desk staffed by a woman who said, "Welcome," with the practiced warmth of someone who said it 40 times a day and had stopped meaning it around the 30th. Milbrook Wellness Center, the sign above the desk read. Comprehensive Psychiatric and Therapeutic Services. Stark turned to Fern. She took in the sign, then the doors behind the desk key card, access no handle on the public side, then the cameras positioned at the corners of the room, angled to cover every inch of floor. "I need you to stay calm," she said to him low and close. "For now." Define calm. Don't break anything. He did not break anything. They were separated at the second set of doors. "Standard intake protocol," said the woman with the key card, in a tone that had been trained to preempt objections. Stark went left with two of the escort team, Fern went right with the other two, and a nurse who introduced herself with a name Fern immediately cataloged and then let go, because names in this context were not information. The room they put her in was clean and small, and had a window that looked onto an interior courtyard rather than the street. The door had a handle on the outside only. The ceiling had a fixture that was either a light or a camera, or both. Fern sat on the edge of the bed and did not touch anything, and did not use any magic. She breathed. She let her eyes move slowly across the room. The door hinges, the vent above the window. The wall panel near the floor that suggested the building had an older electrical system retrofitted with something newer. She listened. Footsteps in the corridor, regular, unhurried. A door opening and closing somewhere to her left twice in the span of 10 minutes, with a keycard beep each time. A voice partially muffled by the wall. Intake log updated. Both flagged for Level C assessment. Level C. She filed it. The nurse returned 40 minutes later with a paper cup of water and a form on a clipboard. Questions about medical history presented with the smooth confidence of a routine that had never once been answered honestly. Fern accepted the clipboard, looked at the first question, and set it face down on the bed. "I'd like to see my companion." "That can be arranged after intake is complete." The nurse's tone had the texture of a policy document. "When is intake complete?" "Usually by tomorrow." 24 hours. She put that number next to Level C and the keycard beep frequency and the retrofitted electrical panel and began building a picture. On the nurse's badge, below the name she had already discarded, was a small secondary mark, a corporate seal minimal, and self-assured the kind that didn't announce itself because the people who needed to recognize it already did. Fern looked at it for exactly as long as she needed to, then looked back at the clipboard. "Thank you." The nurse smiled the 30th time smile and left. In a monitoring room 2 floors up, a technician pulled up the intake files side by side. Male subject elevated aggression indicators, physically exceptional, no known powered profile match. Female subject compliant, low activation, possibly non-powered companion. He updated both entries and flagged them for the morning assessment team, then added a line to the incident summary that would be forwarded to the Oversight Division before midnight. 2 unknown assets secured. Origin unknown. Recommend advanced assessment. Hold at Milbrook pending transfer authorization. He hesitated over the final field, the one marked classification, and typed anomalous. Cross-reference primary subject file. Then he submitted the report and went to get coffee because it was going to be a long night, and whatever these two were, someone upstairs was going to have a lot of questions by morning. Below him, in a room with a window that looked onto an interior courtyard, Fern sat on the edge of a bed and waited and thought and did not use any magic at all. The plan, such as it was, took 11 minutes to explain and had approximately 4 points where it could fail before anyone fired a shot. Butcher laid it out on the hood of a parked car in an alley behind a dry goods warehouse using a marker on the back of a takeout menu. The facility was a converted administrative building 3 blocks north, not the psychiatric center holding Fern and Stark, but a Vought data hub that processed anomalous readings from across the city, monitoring equipment incident logs. The kind of infrastructure that existed specifically to track things like Frieren. "Server room is on the 2nd floor," Butcher said, marking a square on the menu. "Ground floor is clean offices, a public-facing wellness clinic they use as the front. Security tightens past the first set of fire doors." He tapped the mark. "We need what's on that server. Specifically anything tagged spatial anomaly or unregistered energy event in the last 48 hours. Frieren studied the drawing. It was worse than the last one. And the people. The asset transfer logs. Yeah. He capped the marker. If Fern and Stark got moved from Milbrook, it'll show up as a transfer record. Destination case number level of classification. He said this without any particular emphasis, which was the 3rd time in 2 days he had produced information about Vought's internal structure, with a specificity that outpaced what he'd claimed to know. She filed it and said nothing. Huey was going in as a maintenance contractor, ID already prepared, which also didn't invite comment. Milk would hold the exit point. Frieren would go with the Butcher through the service entrance once Huey had the first set of fire doors unlocked from inside. Ground floor staff, how many? 6, maybe 8. Night shift. Butcher folded the menu and put it in his coat pocket. They're not combat. They're clerks. And cameras. Huey kills them from the junction box. You get maybe 4 minutes before the monitoring center notices the feed drop and sends someone to check. 4 minutes was a number she could work with. She had cleared worse corridors in less time, and without the benefit of people running interference on the outside. They went in at 11:43. The ground floor was exactly what it claimed to be a wellness clinic. All soft colors and pamphlets about mindfulness, a reception desk with a vase of fake flowers, and a poster reminding visitors that seeking help is strength. 2 staff members at the desk, neither of them expecting anything more complicated than a slow Tuesday night. Frieren passed through the public entrance behind Butcher, who moved like he belonged there, which was a skill she was beginning to recognize as his most dangerous one. They reached the fire doors at the back of the corridor, 20 seconds behind schedule, because one of the clerks had looked up at the wrong moment, and Butcher had needed to redirect her attention with a question about parking validation. Huey's voice came through the earpiece Butcher had given her. "Doors are open. Cameras on the 2nd floor are down. You have the window." The 2nd floor was different. No fake flowers. Fluorescent overheads, gray carpet, the particular institutional smell of a space where the comfort had been decided by budget rather than preference. Server racks behind reinforced glass at the end of the hall, a guard station between them, and it, with one person who was doing something on his phone and not at this precise moment watching the corridor. Butcher went left. Frieren went right without needing to be told, putting herself between the guard station and the server room entrance and cast the barrier thin, almost translucent enough to stop a person walking through the space, without understanding why they'd stopped. The guard looked up, at the wrong moment stood, took 1 step toward the hall, and walked into the barrier at chest height. He stumbled back, not injured, just confused, the way people get confused when physics misbehaves in a way they have no category for. By the time he'd reoriented, Butcher had the server room door open. "Nice," Butcher said, which was the closest thing to a compliment she'd heard from him. She didn't respond. The server room was cold and loud with the sound of cooling fans. Butcher pulled a drive from his coat and went straight to a terminal with the confidence of someone who had either done this before or been told exactly where to go, and began transferring files. Frieren moved to the secondary rack where a different kind of equipment sat on a dedicated shelf. Not servers, but hardware she recognized by function rather than design. Sensors, the same category of tool as the barrier she'd just cast, but mechanical instead of magical, built to detect energy that didn't fit the expected parameters. She picked up the device that matched the description Butcher had given her. Metal casing indicator lights, a port on the side that connected to the data system. She disconnected it from the rack and put it in the bag she'd been carrying. Then she found the secondary unit, a flat panel with a map interface dots, scattered across a city grid, several of them blinking. One cluster of dots was in the northeast quarter. She photographed the screen with the device Huey had pressed into her hand before they went in, then took the physical data card from the panel's side slot. The dots that weren't in the northeast quarter were in 3 other locations. One of them was approximately where they were standing. She was about to pull the card when the LOA came on. Not loud. Deliberately not loud, a tone, then a voice, measured and internal. Unscheduled access event server level 2. Containment protocol initiated. Please remain calm and await assistance. Butcher pulled the drive. We're done. The transfer records. She hadn't moved. Got them. Let's go. She checked his face. He was already at the door, already moving the particular forward lean of a man who had gotten what he came for. She had not yet confirmed that the transfer records included Fern and Stark's destination. She had his word that they did. His word had a ceiling she had identified 3 days ago. She stepped to the terminal, pulled up the last file he'd accessed, and read the top line before the screen locked. Transfer authorization pending Milbrook intake reference. L4417 and L4418. Destination Milbrook, lower level clearance class C. Still at Milbrook, lower level, class C, level C. The same marker Fern had heard through the wall. She closed the terminal and followed Butcher out. The corridor was no longer empty. 2 Vought security and tactical gear had come up the stairwell on the east end, moving without the urgency of people improvising and with the economy of people executing a procedure they had rehearsed. Behind them, a third in a different jacket, not tactical administrative, who was already on a radio. Butcher assessed the corridor in 1 second flat and said something under his breath that she didn't have vocabulary for yet, but understood from tone. Frieren cast the barrier across the width of the hallway, full deployment. This time, the interlocking hexagonal structure that covered floor to ceiling and held. The 2 security personnel hit it at a walk and stopped hard, and one of them raised a weapon that produced a sound she identified as a firearm and fired twice into the barrier, which absorbed both impacts and did not give. Move! They moved back toward the server room, toward the west stairwell that Butcher had marked as the exit on his takeout menu map. That's not going to hold. Butcher was already moving. Long enough. She was already calculating the barrier would last until something hit it with more force than a firearm, which bought them approximately the time it took Vought security to make a phone call and get a different kind of response deployed. How far to the exit? Spy to 1 floor down service corridor, 30 seconds. Then move faster. They took the west stairs at a pace that was not quite running and came out into the service corridor, which connected to the loading area at the back of the building. Milk had the vehicle running. Huey was already inside. Behind them through the building, the internal announcement had changed register, still not loud, still controlled, but now repeating. External breach confirmed. Asset security protocol active. All personnel maintain position. Frieren got in. Butcher pulled the door shut. Milk drove without being asked, because Milk understood timing, even when he disagreed with everything that had produced the situation requiring it. 2 blocks out, Butcher checked the drive, confirmed the files, and put it in his coat. He said nothing. Neither did she. In the rear view, Huey watched both of them and kept his opinions where he usually kept them when things had gone sideways behind his teeth for later. Supervisor set down her coffee with the supervisor set down her coffee with the deliberate care of someone managing an impulse to throw it. Tell me we have visual on the subjects. Exit camera caught partial. The woman in the robe. One male unidentified. The technician pulled up the freeze frame Frieren in the service corridor bag, over one shoulder, expression carrying approximately nothing. She deployed something in the second-floor hallway. It stopped 2 of ours. Firearms didn't penetrate. The supervisor studied the freeze frame for a long moment. And the equipment. The anomaly sensor array is gone. Portable unit and the map panel data card. A pause that had the quality of a decision being made. This goes to Hartley tonight. And get me aligned to the asset coordination team. I want the Milbrook subjects moved to sub-level before morning. She picked up the coffee after all. If they're using our own detection equipment to find something I want, that's something harder to find. After she left, the technician updated the incident log and added a new field at the bottom of the primary subject file beneath threat assessment pending and priority capture alive. He typed, breach of secure site confirmed. Unknown capabilities exceed standard containment. Recommend escalation to senior asset management. He submitted the file at 12:19 a.m. and did not sleep well for the rest of the night, which was under the circumstances a reasonable response. The medical waste exit was exactly as unpleasant as it sounded and significantly less monitored than any other entry point in the building. Butcher had known this before they arrived, which meant he had known the internal layout of Milbrook's service infrastructure well enough to plan a secondary infiltration route within 2 hours of the first one going sideways. Frierin noted this. She said nothing. They went in at 3:40 a.m. Butcher, Frierin, Huey on overwatch outside with a radio. Milk had argued against the timeline, and lost which had become a pattern Frieren recognized as structural. Milk identified the risk. Butcher acknowledged it and then moved the schedule up anyway. She had added this to the list of things she understood about how Butcher operated. The sub-level was reached by a service elevator that required a key card Butcher produced from his coat without explaining where it had come from. The elevator descended 1 floor past the ground level and opened onto a passage that smelled of antiseptic and circulated air. Fluorescent strips overhead. Doors at regular intervals, each with a panel and a number. No windows. No indication that the world above this ceiling existed. It was, Frierin thought, the most honest room she had encountered in this building. Everything above it had pretended to be something else. Search. She found Fern's door by the mark. Not a message, nothing that obvious. A small notch at the bottom left corner of the door frame made with a fingernail or the edge of a button. Exactly the kind of mark someone left when they wanted to be findable without announcing it. Fern had been in the room for less than 12 hours and had already mapped enough of the sub-level to know which door was worth marking. Frieren pressed her palm flat to the panel. The lock was electronic. She had no framework for electronic systems, but a lock was still a lock, and the latch mechanism was still a moving part, and she knew exactly how to apply pressure to a moving part from the wrong direction. The panel flickered. The door opened. Fern was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, not sleeping. She looked up. 1 second of something crossed her face. Not relief, exactly more the particular quality of a calculation that had just been confirmed, and then it was gone. Mistress Frieren, get up, we're leaving. Fern stood. She had her hands free, which meant they hadn't restrained her overnight, which meant they'd assessed her as compliant. She had let them assess her as compliant. Frieren looked at her and understood that Fern had spent the last 12 hours being exactly as useful as possible without using a single visible spell, and felt something close to satisfaction. Stark is 4 doors down on the right. Fern was already at the doorframe checking the passage. They separated us at intake. The guard rotation changes in approximately 8 minutes, I've been counting. Laid. They moved into the passage. Butcher fell in behind them without a word. Stark's door was not marked, but it was louder than the others. A periodic impact from inside, steady and deliberate, the sound of someone doing push-ups or trying to dismantle the bed frame. Frieren opened the panel the same way and pulled the door. Stark was on his feet before she'd cleared the threshold weight forward, shoulders set. 3 seconds of recalibration. Then, "You're late?" "You're welcome." Fern didn't look back. He looked at her, the specific look of someone who has been alone and worried for 12 hours and is not going to admit to either. "Are you fine, both of us?" She was already moving toward the passage. "Come." He came. He was favoring one side slightly, which he was trying not to show and not quite succeeding at. Frierin clocked it and moved to his right without making anything of it. They were 2/3 of the way to the elevator when the internal announcement came on. Not the measured tone from before. This was shorter, faster clipped at the edges. "Sub-level breach. Lockdown initiated. All access points securing." The elevator doors 15 meters ahead slid shut. Butcher said something she'd stopped needing vocabulary for and switched to the radio. "Huey, stairs. East stairwell still open. Maybe 30 seconds. 30 seconds was also a number she could work with. Fern went first because Fern was the one who'd been counting guard rotations and knew which side of the passage had the camera blind spot. She moved along the left wall with the flat efficiency of someone who had learned fieldcraft from a person who'd had 1,000 years to perfect it. Stark went second, wider and louder, and he knew it. He was using himself as a visual block between the camera at the passage's end and Fern's back. Frieren cast a thin layer across the passage entrance behind them. Not a full barrier, a partial screen enough to scatter a sightline and buy confusion rather than a hard stop. Then she went through the east stairwell door that Fern was already holding open. The stairs went up 2 flights and opened onto a service landing. Emergency lighting only. The door to the ground floor had a crash bar, which meant it would trigger an alarm when opened. Butcher hit it without hesitating. The alarm sounded one sharp tone, then absorbed into the lockdown noise, and they came out into a loading bay that smelled of diesel and wet concrete. Huey had the vehicle. They were in it and moving within 90 seconds of the crash bar. At 3 blocks out, Stark said, "I counted 6 cameras in that sub-level." 7. Fern didn't slow down. One in the corner above the second door was positioned to look like a fixture. "I saw it." "I know." Frieren was in the front seat, the equipment bag between her feet. She had both items from the data hub, intact, the sensor unit and the map card. She needed one more element, a specific location, a specific moment, and the path home would be achievable. Not guaranteed. Achievable. She was calculating this when she noticed Butcher's hands on the wheel. He was driving with the ease of a man who had gotten exactly what he expected. Not relieved, not tense. Simply the particular steadiness of someone whose plan had gone according to the version of it he hadn't shared with the rest of the room. She thought back to the stairwell. The crash bar. Butcher hitting it without hesitation, without checking, without asking if there was another way. The alarm it had triggered, clean and sharp, feeding directly into Milbrook's already active lockdown system. A targeted alert. In a secured facility. In the middle of a containment event. The kind of signal that when it reached the right desk got forwarded to a different kind of response than Vought security could provide. She looked at the side of his face. He was watching the road. "You triggered the alarm," Her voice was level. On purpose. A beat. 2. Crash bars trigger alarms. You chose that door. He didn't answer. In the back, Fern and Stark had gone quiet with the specific quality of people who understood they were listening to something important. Huey. She kept her eyes forward. Were the other exits available? Huey from the back seat said nothing for a moment. Then, yeah, the west door had a card reader. We had a card. Butcher kept his eyes on the road. Frieren kept hers on his profile. The card. She did not make it a question. From the same code that had the Milbrook access card. You carry a lot of keys for a man who says he doesn't know this building. I'm resourceful. You wanted the alarm. You wanted the signal to go up. She thought about the transfer records she'd read off the terminal at the data hub, the way he'd been at the door before she'd finished the ease with which he'd gotten what he came for. You wanted them to send someone they haven't sent yet. The city moved past outside. Butcher said nothing. And his silence was, she found, a more complete answer than anything he'd offered in the 3 days since she'd met him. She turned back to the road and did not speak again. The report reached the Senior Oversight Division at 4:17 a.m., compiled from 3 separate incident logs and flagged by the duty supervisor who had now been awake for 19 hours and was no longer trying to keep the alarm out of her voice. Sub-level breach. Both Level C assets removed from Milbrook by the same unknown group. Same capability signature as the Vought data hub incident. She set the files in front of the person across the desk who had the particular stillness of someone who had dealt with worse and was running out of patience for it. The asset who cleared our containment team, the woman she's operating at a level our security isn't built for. We've lost her twice in 12 hours. The person across the desk read the top file, then the second one, then set both down. Get me the 7 liaison. He set the files down. Tell them we need an interception. Which one? A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. The one who doesn't leave witnesses. The supervisor left. The man across the desk pulled the primary subject file and read the last entry. Recommend escalation to Senior Asset Management. He typed one line beneath it. Approved. Asset interception authorized. Then he closed the file, and the night continued around him with the particular momentum of a machine that had just been given permission to do what it had wanted to do all along. They made the roof access 3 minutes ahead of whatever Vought had dispatched, which turned out to be exactly 3 minutes less than they needed. The rooftop was flat, and utilitarian ventilation units, cable conduits, a water tower on the north end, the city spread out below in every direction. No civilians. That was the first thing Frieren checked. One maintenance worker had been up here earlier. The door he'd used to leave was still swinging on its hinge from a wind that had picked up off the river. She set the bag down and pulled out the sensor unit. The map card was already in the secondary slot. The device had been running since the data hub, 47 minutes of passive collection, accumulating a picture of where the spatial distortions were thickest. She had been doing her own calculation alongside it, cross-referencing what she felt against what the device measured, and the 2 pictures were converging on a single point. The rooftop. Specifically the northwest quadrant near the water tower. The same structural pull she'd felt the moment they reached altitude, the thinning she recognized from years of working at the edges of what the world considered permissible. She was still calibrating when the air changed. Not wind, not temperature. Something underneath, both a displacement, a compression. The way space behaves when something very fast has just stopped moving through it. She straightened and turned before she'd consciously processed the shift. He landed on the southern lip of the roof with no ceremony whatsoever. No announcement. No dramatic pause. He simply arrived one boot on the parapet, and the weight of his attention moved across the rooftop like a pressure front. Cape blue and red, the suit she'd seen on every billboard in this city. Jaw like something engineered rather than grown. He looked at Butcher first, and his expression did something that was technically a smile. "Billy?" The voice carried easily across the roof. No need to raise it, he knew it carried. "You look terrible." "Appreciated," Butcher said. Homelander's attention shifted. It moved across Fern, across Stark, and then settled on Frieren, with the particular quality of a man who had never needed to wonder what he was looking at before, and was encountering the experience for the first time. "Who's this?" Not a question to her. A question about her directed at Butcher, as though she were an object in the room whose provenance needed clarifying. Frieren was already moving not toward him, not away laterally, putting herself between his direct sightline and Fern. The sensor unit was still running in the bag on her shoulder. She needed 2 more minutes of collection, possibly 3. "Get behind the water tower," she said to Fern and Stark, low without moving her mouth much. "Both of you, now." Fern went. She took Stark's wrist on the way, which was the correct call because Stark had planted his feet in the stance of someone who had decided to be useful and needed to be redirected before that decision became structural. "Hey." Homelander had tracked the movement. "I didn't say you could move." He took 1 step off the parapet and landed on the rooftop surface. The impact was not heavy. He chose not to make it heavy, which was somehow more unnerving than if he had. The restraint of it. The demonstration that the force existed and he was choosing for now to keep it managed. "I asked you a question," he said to Frieren directly this time. "Who are you? What is that thing you're carrying? And what exactly do you think you're doing on Vought property?" Frieren looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at unfamiliar spell structures, cataloging, measuring, working out the architecture before deciding how to proceed. "Leaving," she said. Something moved across Homelander's face. Not anger. Anger came later when ego had been properly engaged. This was earlier than that, the faint registering of a data point that didn't fit the expected model. People said a lot of things to him. Defiant things, frightened things, strategic things. What they did not generally say within 30 seconds of meeting him was one word flatly without any visible affect. "I don't think you are," he said. He moved then fast, the speed she'd anticipated from the data she had on him, closing distance the way a thrown object closes distance rather than the way a person does. Frieren raised her free hand and cast the barrier at full extension, floor to the rooftop height between his projected path and her position. He hit it at speed and stopped. Not bounced, stopped the way you stop when something you expected to be, air turns out not to be. He put both hands against it and pushed, and the hexagonal structure held, and the light where his palms contacted it flared briefly visible pale gold, the geometry of the shield becoming momentarily apparent before it settled back to translucent. Homelander stepped back 1 pace and looked at his hands, then at the barrier. Then at Frieren with an expression she read as the recalibration of a man who had just learned he didn't have full information. "Huh," he said. From behind the water tower, a shot came. Fern 1 Zoltrak, pulse clean and precise, aimed not at Homelander, but at the ventilation unit 6 feet to his left. The impact blew the casing off and threw debris across his sightline, and in the half-second he turned toward the source, Frieren moved. Not toward the exit, toward the northwest quadrant. She covered the distance in 8 seconds, the bag already opened the sensor unit in her hands. The reading was at maximum. The distortion was here, exactly here, the same spatial thinning she and Fern and Stark had come through from the other side. Not a door yet, a location, a potential. She needed to make it actual. "Frieren," Butcher's voice from the southeast. She didn't look. "Kill him, now, while he's—" "No." She was already working, hands moving through the calculations she'd been building since the library, since the sensor data, since the moment she understood what Vought's equipment had actually been measuring. The distortion responded to pressure the way all unstable thresholds did, carefully, incrementally, in a language she'd spent 1,000 years learning to speak. Behind her, Homelander had located Fern's position and was moving toward the water tower. Stark came out from the other side of it, not to fight, to redirect, putting himself in Homelander's sightline, and then immediately moving in a different direction, making himself the more proximate target without engaging directly. Homelander tracked Stark for approximately 2 seconds. Then he turned back toward Frieren, because Frieren was the one doing something he didn't understand, and things he didn't understand did not remain unaddressed. "Hey." He was 12 feet away. The heat vision didn't activate. He wanted her intact, or he wanted answers, or both. "What are you doing?" She heard him. She kept working. 10 feet. The barrier she'd left standing near the south end of the roof detonated behind him. Not cast, not maintained, just released the stored pressure of the structure, discharging at once. It wasn't destructive. It was loud and bright, and it threw him 2 feet sideways and cost him 1 full second of orientation. 1 second was what she had. The threshold opened. Not dramatically, not with light or sound or the operatic excess that humans often expected of the impossible. Just a seam, a place where the air was different, where the geometry of the space disagreed with itself along a line approximately 2 meters wide and tall enough to step through. It smelled like the Auster forest. It smelled like home. "Go." She didn't turn around. "Both of you, now." She heard Fern move. She heard Stark follow faster than expected, the particular sound of someone covering ground with purpose rather than hesitation. She heard them go through. From the southeast corner of the roof, Butcher was covering ground toward Homelander, with something in his hand, the Temp 5 he'd been holding in reserve. The edge it gave him the decision he'd made at some point in the last 12 hours to use this moment whether or not Frieren cooperated. He was going to do what he'd brought her here to facilitate, with or without her. Homelander had recovered from the barrier discharge. He turned toward Butcher, and his expression shifted into something that had stopped pretending to be human. Frieren looked at Butcher. She looked at Homelander. She calculated the geometry of what happened next. If she stepped through the threshold? Butcher with a hit of Temp 5 and a death wish Homelander with restored focus and considerable grievance, no barrier left standing between them. The result of that calculation had a small number of outcomes. She cast the last thing she had time to cast, not at Homelander, not at Butcher, but between them. A wall of mana, dense and opaque, and not designed to hold long. 2 minutes, possibly 3, long enough for whatever came next to be their business and not hers. "Don't," she said to Butcher. One word. Whether it landed was his choice. Then she stepped through. The threshold closed behind her with a sound like a held breath releasing. Right. On the rooftop, in the sudden absence of the woman in the white robe and whatever she had been doing, Homelander and Butcher stood on opposite sides of an invisible wall in the thin city air and looked at each other. The wall held. For a moment, just a moment, neither of them moved. Then Homelander hit it. They came through the threshold into a rooftop that no longer had a threshold in it. Fern landed first, one hand on the gravel surface, and turned immediately to check behind her. Stark came through half a second later, at a run, and nearly went over the parapet before Fern caught his jacket. The seam in the air closed behind him, with a sound like a single breath in, then out, then nothing. No Frierin. Fern held the edge of the parapet and looked at the space where the opening had been. The city was below them. The Auster forest was nowhere, and the air smelled of diesel and river water and the particular wrongness of a place that was not home. "She'll come," Stark said. He was using his certainty voice, the one that meant he was working hard at certainty. Fern did not answer. She turned back toward the rooftop door and started calculating the fastest way down to street level if they needed to move. On the other rooftop, 30 seconds earlier, Frieren had the threshold open. The seam held 2 meters wide, the smell of the Oster forest bleeding through into the city air, pine resin and wet earth, the smell of a world that operated on different rules. Fern was through. Stark was through. She had one foot on the edge of the threshold when Butcher grabbed her arm. Not hard. Just contact a hand on her forearm, the specific grip of a man who had one card left and knew it. 2 minutes, he said. "That's all I need. 2 minutes, and he's done, and you never have to think about this city again." She looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face. "You already have everything you need," he said. "That thing you're carrying, the gear you took. You got out. Your people got out. All I'm asking is 2 minutes." 12 feet away, Homelander had hit the barrier she'd left standing and was working through it with both hands, the hexagonal structure cracking under the sustained pressure, in a way that announced it would not last much longer. His attention was split between the barrier and Butcher, which was the only reason she still had a conversation happening instead of a problem. "He'll find you again," Butcher said. "He doesn't let things go. You know that now. You've seen how this works." He was speaking fast, not panicked. Calculated fast, the speed of a man deploying arguments in order of effectiveness. A week from now, a month, he finds a way to wherever you came from, and you have this same problem without the element of surprise. It was not an irrational argument. That was the most honest assessment she could make of it. It was also not her problem to solve by becoming what he needed her to be. "No," she said. "Frieren, I'm not your weapon." She pulled her arm free and turned toward the threshold. Behind her, the barrier gave not all at once in sections, the hexagonal geometry fracturing from the center outward, and Homelander came through it, with the momentum of something that had been waiting for permission. He covered the distance in under a second. He was going to reach her before she cleared the threshold. And they both knew it, and the calculation was already complete in his face, the absolute certainty of a person for whom speed had always been enough. Stark came back through. He'd been on the other side for 40 seconds. He came back through the threshold at a dead run from the home side and hit Homelander at shoulder height with everything he had, no axe, no weapon. Just his body and the physics of a collision between two things moving in opposite directions. It was not enough to knock Homelander down. It was enough to knock him sideways, a half step, a rotation. And in the moment of rotation, Homelander's reach fell 3 inches short of Frieren's shoulder. She stepped through. Stark was 2 steps behind her. The threshold closed. The sound this time was not a breath. It was the sound of something under tension, releasing all at once, a crack at a high frequency, the sensor unit in her bag, discharging every unit of energy it had accumulated and then going dark. The device had run the full duration of its operational capacity. Whatever data it held was locked now, frozen at the moment of closure. She didn't need it anymore. Around them, forest, old growth, the Oster. Specifically the road she'd been walking when the world had briefly disagreed with itself and sent her somewhere else. The light was mid-morning, the same light she had left, or close enough that the difference was only meaningful to someone who kept careful track of hours, which she did. Fern was standing 15 feet ahead on the road pack on her back, having apparently located it from wherever the crossing had deposited their gear. She had her staff in her hands, and her expression was the one she used when she had been worried and was now processing the fact that she no longer needed to be. Stark sat down on a tree root and put his head in his hands for a moment. Then he looked up. "Are we?" "Yes," Frieren said. He nodded. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Frieren set the bag down on the road. The sensor unit inside was dead, no lights, no heat. The casing slightly warped from the discharge. The data card from the map panel was intact, though it would read as blank to any device in this world. She had no use for either of them now. She left the bag on the road and kept walking. Back on the rooftop, Milbrook, the city that ran on money and image and the careful management of what the public was allowed to know. Homelander stood at the edge of where the threshold had been and looked at the air. His hands were at his sides. The barrier Frieren had left was gone, dissolved the moment she'd stepped through, taking its geometry with it. There was no trace of the opening, no residue, no evidence that anything had happened here except a scorch pattern on the gravel from the sensor unit's discharge, and a man with a crowbar standing 12 feet away, watching him with the expression of someone who had expected worse and wasn't sure how to feel about getting less. "She's gone," Butcher said. Homelander turned toward him. The expression he was wearing was not the engineered charisma of the billboard version, not the controlled threat of someone who knew they were on camera. It was the face that existed underneath those faces, the one that came out when something had happened that wasn't supposed to happen. "I know," he said. They stood in the city air for a moment that had no useful category. Then Homelander rose straight up without ceremony and was gone. The cleanup crew arrived 11 minutes later. Not Police Vought Special Services, the division that existed specifically for the space between what happened and what was officially reported. They swept the rooftop in 12 minutes. The scorch mark photographed and documented the gravel sample bagged to the maintenance worker who'd been on the roof earlier, visited at his apartment, and provided with a careful account of what he had and had not witnessed. Signed under a non-disclosure agreement that had been prepared before he was asked. The media relations team received a brief from the Oversight Division at 6:14 a.m. No public incident. Isolated security response to unauthorized access. Subjects departed. No further action required. The brief was accurate in all its stated facts and misleading in all the ways that mattered, which was the standard by which Vought measured good communication. By 7 a.m., the rooftop was clean. By 8 a.m., the incident file had been reclassified to a tier that required executive authorization to access, which meant in practice that it would not be accessed. The woman in the white robe did not appear in any official record. The spatial anomaly data the sensor unit had collected was flagged as corrupted and archived. The 2 Level C assets had escaped. All witnesses had been processed. In the file's final field under resolution, someone had typed 2 words and closed the document. Asset lost. Butcher was 3 blocks from Milbrook when Huey caught up with him, out-of-breath phone in hand. "Where are you going?" "Thinking." "About what?" Butcher kept walking. The city was starting its morning coffee shops, unlocking delivery trucks, running their routes, the machinery of a normal day grinding into operation over the top of everything that had happened in the last 8 hours. "She said no," Huey said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation delivered carefully by someone who had learned to be careful with observations around Butcher. "Yeah." "And Homelander's still?" "Yeah." Huey walked beside him for half a block. "So what now?" Butcher didn't answer immediately. He stopped at a corner and looked at the street ahead, the ordinary length of it, the ordinary people on it, the extraordinary degree to which none of them knew what had just happened, 4 blocks north and 3 floors up. "Something else," he said. He crossed the street. Huey followed because that was what Huey did, and the city absorbed them both. Without comment, the way cities absorb everything thoroughly, efficiently, and without keeping records of what it cost.